there are no wrong questions here. If the whole Informal Policy Working Group came about because students wanted to talk about things that were introduced in class and we couldn't go into because of time or whatever the reason was. And so meeting outside of class for the purpose of getting to ask those questions and do the deep dive that time didn't permit in class. So there are no wrong questions. I don't know where this discussion is going to go. I never do. I usually have a few things to introduce to begin with. However, beyond that, who knows where it's going to end up. To that end, I'm going to remind everybody, be respectful. We're colleagues and co-workers in the foreign affairs, international relations policy realm in this venue. So be respectful. Likewise, no thin skins. Don't take offense if no offense was intended. If someone raises a point that you disagree with, respectfully disagree, lay out your points, and let the conversation go from there. Normally, when we are at a place like Jekyll and Hyde, it's very easy for one person to sort of interject into the conversation because we're all there and we can read each other's body language. The difference is on Zoom, that's a little more awkward. If you want to make a point and it seems not to be able to interject, use the raise hand function. I'll see it and we'll be able to bring into the conversation. And at the request of Christopher, who kind of got the ball rolling on this, I've prepared about a 10-minute, maybe even not that long, overview of where we're at in the current situation in Ukraine, in the Russo-Ukrainian War, and kind of the events that have unfolded in the last week. So, in February of last year, the Russians had controlled and they had used the Wagner group to infiltrate the portions of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts here. Okay. They also had been instrumental and believed that they were the forces that were actually used, the Little Green Men, in 2014 that had seized Crimea. Now, because the world community, including the US, had made no effort. They gave a stern talking to Russia about seizing these areas, but no really effective response. Russia was basically allowed to keep them from 2014 until they started the invasion in 2022. When the attacks started, they immediately expanded all of this area, the complete this entire Donbas region, as being integral to Donetsk and Luhansk, and therefore was independent and then was going to be annexed by Russia, which they subsequently did. So, if I put that away, now I'm going to go back and see if I can do this. Now I'm going to try to share my screen again so that we can see. There we go. It's amazing. Actual learning is actually taking place. So, by the end of April last year, okay, the Russians had taken and seized all of, here we have Melitopol, we have the Crimean Peninsula just off the and they were continuing to attack. But you see, they had established what we call a land bridge between the Crimea and the Donbas, and they had attacked and all the way as far as Kharkiv. And so that's how the situation on the ground looked in April. Then, I'm going to try one more time. So on the big map, share screen, doink. So all of this portion in blue, this is where the first year of Ukrainian counterattacks have driven the Russians back. Away from Odessa, these red arrows show where the principal Russian offensives had occurred. But the reason why I wanted to show this particular map is this is where it stood in September of last year. So what we have, there's my cursor, there it is. So again, notice what's significant here. The Ukrainian forces have actually done a remarkable job of driving the Russian forces out of, I would estimate, about half of the occupied territory they had at their greatest extent. So all the way, but what they have not been successful doing is breaking or severing this land bridge that extends from Mariupol to Melitopol and connects the Crimean Peninsula. The most recent Ukrainian counteroffensive that just started in the last week and a half actually is focused along this area, as we're going to see. Okay. So now I'm going to go back and share a different screen. Doink. Get the right button. Okay. So this is where it sits, pretty much where the lines have stabilized. And I like this map because it kind of takes a lot of the clutter out of the way. We can see that the Russian forces have been pushed back to the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. Here is the region around Melitopol, Mariupol, but the Russians control all of the Ukrainian coast on the Sea of Azov and still control all of the Crimean Peninsula. What I do find interesting is that we're seeing evidence now of Ukrainian insurgency in these regions. And so this essentially, the Russians have been driven back from Kharkiv, and this is essentially the forward line extending down to the east bank of the Dnieper River. They've been driven back from their farthest advance at Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson and Mykolaiv. And then the last map I want to show you, this brings us to where we're seeing the counteroffensive. And unfortunately, counteroffensive has been happening right in this portion here, and it just simply has not been significant enough in order to show up really, quite frankly, on the map. But I like this map because it does show us when the Wagner Group mutiny started, and the end of last week, the first place they went was Rostov-on-Don. This is the headquarters of the Russian military southern district. And Rostov-on-Don, this city, of course, it's a maritime city on the Sea of Azov. This is the principal logistics hub that supports all of the Russian forces. So if Wagner Group had just simply taken Rostov-on-Don and then held it, we'd be talking about a very different situation. But for their own reasons, in addition to taking Rostov-on-Don, about half of their forces were stationed at Voronezh here. And so the forces that were here in Rostov-on-Don headed north, linked up here, and proceeded north as far as the town or city of Yelets. And Yelets is about 400 kilometers from Moscow. So they really didn't get close. They didn't get nearly as close as the media suggested. But it did require that Moscow had to deploy direct kinetic action. They had to attack their own bridges. They had they brought helicopter gunships up, a number of which, I believe 6 in total, were shot down. So this was not by any means bloodless, but for whatever reason, and I don't know the reasons, Prigozhin, the commander of Wagner Group, or the president of Wagner Group, or whatever they're calling himself, for whatever reason, he changed his mind, and they withdrew from Yelets back to Voronezh, and there the situation basically sits. So what we have is the Ukrainian counteroffensive is struggling to effect a breakthrough, because the Russian forces along this line have had months to prepare defenses in depth. So they have anti-armor, what are called tank ditches. They've dug big trenches, poured concrete into them to make that vehicles have difficulty crossing. They've laid in minefields. They've sighted in their long-range artillery. They're using aerial observation to keep the minefields in view. They've put up obstacles, and it's not that mechanized forces and armored forces can't get through, but it takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of pre-positioning of men and materiel, and then you got to be able to suppress all of these different Russian systems. Otherwise, you get hung up in the minefields and hung up in the obstacles, and you can't go anywhere. So, as you guys have heard me say in the past, I think that this is going to end up being a hard frontier that's heavily reinforced and essentially becomes a frontier like the one that separates North Korea and South Korea, at least for the foreseeable future. So that's my introduction. That was 7 minutes. So I hope I didn't talk too long. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I can come back to these maps if we need to see them, or I'll leave them up. What would you guys like?
I'd like it if you kept the maps up. What do y'all think?
Okay. So, Christopher, since
I would agree. Keep it up.
Yeah, you were the one who sparked this whole thing. So you get the first question, or you get to make the first comment.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Summers.
Sure.
Obviously, when you and I had originally spoken and set this whole meeting up, things were moving very quickly. I believe we spoke on Saturday, and
Yes.
that's when everything was moving. I mean, I remember you and I were talking. We said the next 6 hours are going to change what happens. I mean, and obviously things didn't. I mean, as was probably foreseeable, things did not quite go in Prigozhin's direction. I have 2 questions. I guess just fundamentally, any idea what sort of calculation Prigozhin made that led him to send his troops on Moscow? Any idea what his objectives were? Because it doesn't seem like he came out of this with much, except for ending his career and making Putin look a little weak.
That is a very good question. I have no good answers, other than to say, Prigozhin does not demonstrate that he is a natural military genius, and there's nothing wrong with that. Most most commanders aren't. Their geniuses are far and few between. Napoleon was a natural military genius. Stonewall Jackson was a natural military genius. They're two good examples. Robert E. Lee was not a natural military genius. He was an incredibly, he was a very powerful commander, but he was always fighting someone else's strategic concepts, mostly Napoleon's. It's not to take anything away from him as a general, but Prigozhin, I think that the whole career of his career as a military entrepreneur. I don't know much about the confirmed history of Wagner Group. I do know that it first came to prominence in either 2012 or 2012, and it was their initial organization was about 5,000 employees, mercenaries, and most of them had been hired from the Russian army's special forces and better trained units. So if there was a professional corps of the Russian army that NCOs and officers were leaving to pursue other interests, well, they were getting recruited by this mercenary outfit, this private military contractor. And where they originally were fighting was in Syria and in Africa, and they were very much encouraged by the Kremlin, by Moscow, as a way of exerting Russian soft power without it being soft. So they were as private military contractors, they were not Russia couldn't be held legally liable for their actions, but everybody knew they were Russian. And so they began getting contracts throughout Saharan and sub-Saharan Africa to provide ostensibly local security for development projects and in regions that state governments were simply not able to provide security. Now, what did the Wagner Group mercenaries in providing these security services? They tended to act like mercenaries and warlords always do, or I should say mercenaries under warlords, and that is they stole from the local populace, extorted whatever was worth stealing, and raping the local women. But because they were functioning in this gray area between state, semi-failed state status and full, if the states they were operating in, such as Syria, could provide security for the civilian population, the Wagner Group wouldn't be needed. But the fact that that state security couldn't, and the locals wanted to have something, so they essentially make this Faustian bargain to have these Russian mercenaries come in. Now, when you've got only 5,000 or so mercenaries, you're going to be operating in fairly small company and battalion, meaning about from 100 to 800 effectives in a unit. When the war in Ukraine started, these guys who had already been operating in Donetsk, in this region here, and in Crimea, this region here, they suddenly get tasked with providing additional combat capability in the attack on Bakhmut, the campaign. And so Prigozhin goes out and he starts recruiting. And where he's recruiting from is the Russian prisons. And he expands Wagner Group up to 25,000. Now, 25,000 sounds like a lot, but in campaign purposes, that really means you've got about two and a half divisions. And a division is usually about 10,000 soldiers plus support troops. So he's got about two divisions, an understrength corps, which means he's basically functioning like a 2-star general, maybe a 3-star general. Okay. Now, when we think about it from those conditions, if he's got one division with which he takes Rostov-on-Don, and he's got another division up here in Voronezh, that's just not that much military strength. And I think that although he got a good reception in Rostov-on-Don, that made him confident. He's got no formal military training. I mean, he went from being a criminal to being a caterer to being a military entrepreneur. But as far as I know, I don't know what books he's picked up and read. I don't know what training he's gotten. But what it suggests is that he has a good sense of battlefield leadership at the tactical level. But his first foray into an operational concept, we just got to call it what it is. He failed because he starts up the road. Had he considered fuel? Had he considered he's already short of ammunition? That's been his big complaint with the Russian military, is that they haven't been supplying him with satisfactory amounts of ammunition. So planning a campaign that's going to roll some 800 kilometers and culminate by rolling into Moscow, where's the fuel going to come from? Where's the food? Are the troops going to roll continuously? Are they, because they, okay, where are they going to feed? Are they going to stop and feed? Are they going to set up local security? Are they going to try to win the hearts and minds of the people on the road? Are they going to put out loudspeakers? Are they going to put out social media? All of these things that have to be planned for to conduct the simplest and smallest corps level 2-division campaign. And I just think he bit off more than he could chew and didn't really understand that when the campaign was no longer a ground slog on a fixed location like Bakhmut, or when it was not Maskirovka operations in Crimea and the Donbass, when they really had now suddenly to behave like modern, contemporary, full spectrum capable mechanized infantry, I think they got as far as Yelets and realized they didn't know what the hell they were doing. That's my take. Forgive the harsh language.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Summers. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we're all kind of surprised about how that whole campaign go. I have one more question, but I kind of wanted to open the floor. Do you guys have questions? I know, Rebecca, you're working at the State Department now, right?
No, I'm not. I'm working at the International Monetary Fund.
IMF. Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
cool.
Rebecca, are any of the IMF projects that you're participating in, have you been pulled into, or are you working with a Ukraine support group that's planning for reconstruction in Ukraine or has started reconstruction in Ukraine?
At the moment, I am not. But also, unfortunately, I can't really discuss what I work with. So I apologize.
We get it. You are cool.
That's all right. You are if we're not cleared to participate in that discussion, we're not cleared to participate in that discussion. And unlike some parts of the government which get a wink and a nod about security, we take it very seriously in the IPWG. So
Thank you.
what can you tell us about what you're currently doing?
So my position specifically, I actually go from different teams around the IMF. So I work, I'm mostly in mission support. So it's anything from really like circulating documents and any project that they might just like require my help on. So mostly that has to do with the systems that we provide, that are provided by the fund. But kind of as I mentioned, I work with working on different groups. So based on how much help they need. So I'm actually currently working on a legal anti-corruption governance group. So most of my project have a lot to do with that. And then eventually,
Very cool.
thank you. And then eventually I'm going to be moved to a different team who might need my assistance. But basically what I do, like I kind of mentioned, is like mostly like working on different projects. So that has to do with different documents, and kind of like everybody knows, the fund is mostly used to provide monetary support. So they're like mostly focused on those and Article 4 and things like that.
Is Ukraine receiving IMF funding at the moment? Like
190 countries are part of the International Monetary Fund group. I think the ones that are not are, I know North Korea is not, and then I don't remember all the other ones, but I know that it's a total of 190.
Christopher, the only class that I spend a lot is a relative term. We spend several days talking about the various international fiscal organizations that sort of baseline knowledge, and that's all in the 299 class. So you know, I still want you to take that class, but that's, and so I did want to ask Rebecca, just for my own critique, when you applied for the job and then when you got it, did you feel that your IR coursework had at least prepared you to, I mean, we did a very high 30,000 foot view. You may have had, did you have Dr. Hansen's, that would have been that's one class I've added to the list for the IR program that I'm trying to encourage. Actually, Michael Brennan, I think I'm going to try to get him to take that class next year. But yeah, that's a good class to have. And he does a deep dive just into those various agencies.
I would say that not only for grad school, because I took my first class in grad school and it was pretty much an easy A. Let's just say that, because it was like it was all about that I already learned while I was in college. So it was really interesting to see different perspective on that. But kind of like connecting back to work, I would say having a background in art is definitely very helpful, because you actually understand what the fund stands for, what are its goals, its mission. I think that's the most important thing whenever you are enrolled in an organization, that it's so big that it doesn't just focus domestically, but it's pretty much a group, like I mentioned, of 190 countries. So kind of like Dr. Summers, like whenever we went to Belmont, the ER minor was just kind of forming, but I definitely think it was very helpful, because also in different projects that I work on, I'm able to apply my own knowledge on it that I kind of have since going to school. Because yeah, it's very economic based, of course, but you also have to have you have to be centered by international relations, because international economics. So I would say it's definitely very helpful, and it's like allow me to put my own input and understand better the work that I do and able to succeed. I definitely think so.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I admit that for a number of the students who really were the core group that got the IR program off the ground, I felt a little trying to find the right word, bittersweet that you guys really were the ones who did all of the heavy lifting and getting the program started. And now that it's up and running and it's in the course catalog, we had our first graduate in May. And the program is expanding, and you guys, it's like, it should be some kind of recognition for that, because you guys really made it work.
They will have a scholarship after y'all.
I'm very happy that it's actually up and going. I keep going back. I'm like, are they doing a master or anything? That would be very nice.
I have dreams.
Okay.
We'll see. Don't stop what you're doing with Troy, with that Troy State. But
Yeah.
yes, but someday. Okay, so but to kind of bring the topic back to Ukraine and current events, is this map still useful or?
I had a question relating to the map.
Okay.
If no one else has a question. I'm wondering why would Ukraine attack Rostov-on-Don why does it seem like their offensive is moving to split their occupied territory?
Okay.
When Rostov, the logistics hub, is inside Russian territory, and Ukraine's always said that their military objectives are not to go inside of Russia. But
correct. This map, this arrow, this is not a Ukrainian offensive. Ukraine is not attacking Rostov-on-Don. This was the first move that Wagner Group made, hence the red arrow.
I thought you said that. Sorry.
Oh, and so this portion here,
okay,
is where we find the Ukrainian counteroffensive is right along this portion of the front line, and it appears to me that doesn't really show on this map as much as I would like it to. So I'm going to try. Did you just see this map that I've got up?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go to a different map. Where's my map? There it is. And I got to go through all the cookies, so it takes me a minute to sort of get all this. Okay. So Melitopol is right here.
Yes.
Mariupol is right here. Mariupol is the principal seaport through which, if Russia is going to if they're going to successfully annex the Donbass region, they have to have a seaport, because all of the economic goods and services, the heavy industry, steel, petroleum, and this is why they want this region, because this is where Ukraine's heavy industry, iron, steel, petroleum, are all located in the Donbass. But these are goods that, to get into the world market, have to go through a seaport. That's what Mariupol is. And so even though they flattened Mariupol, I mean, it's a ghost town now, but you use heavy equipment, bulldozers, you clear the roads, you reconstruct the port, you put the piers up, boom, ships can sail in. And so Mariupol is one of the two links that make this whole campaign work for the Russians. The second is Melitopol, right here. Why? Because it is the logistics hub, road and rail, for connecting all of this piece of Ukraine. So all of these smaller ports along here all connect to either Melitopol or Mariupol. So if the Ukrainian counteroffensive can sever this land bridge between Melitopol and Mariupol, they will have achieved something really strategically significant. If during this campaign season, because this is going to last all summer long, if they can make meaningful progress in this region, basically this long rectangle right here, I believe that's where they're going to put their main focus. They have retaken the western bank of the Dnieper River. They have shown that they can disrupt road and rail support into Crimea, and they have shown that they can disrupt the Kerch Bridge connecting Crimea to the rest of Mother Russia. But as long as Russia controls Crimea, oh, dadgummit. I hate it when that happens. Yes, 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 I agree. Put the cookies away. Yes, I agree. Let me go back where I was. So we can see that, yeah, thank you very much.
I guess I wonder why they're. I guess if you compare this to their last northern offensive, the northern offensive took out a lot of, so it took out the territory in the north, reducing the battle, like, I don't know what the word is, but like the battle lines, reducing the front. If they take that rectangle that you were talking about, they're gonna have to fight on both sides of that front. And so even if they take that rectangle, they're still gonna have the Donbass to the east and Crimea, Mariupol to the west. So there's still going to be long areas of front that they're still going to have to deal with.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah.
so they either have to take,
yeah. This rectangle that I describe is not. If it's possible, although I don't think it likely. I think it is possible that the Russian forces could collapse, that the Russian army just starts, they start throwing down their weapons, raising their hands, surrendering to Ukrainian forces. If they lose heart and say, there's just nothing worth fighting for, it's nothing worth losing my life for.
And do you think that's likely after the Wagner Group is making them, or after making them sign contracts with the DoD rather than
well, again, the Wagner Group is a wild card in the sense that I think the Wagner Group, I think their portion of their role in this war is now over, because if the Wagner Group is allowed to continue, they will go back to their African and Middle Eastern extortion racket. That's what, you can't have combat capable forces hanging around that you can't trust their loyalty.
Yeah.
And so they're going to want if they allow the if the Kremlin allows the Wagner Group to continue to exist at all, they will strictly be a foreign legion, an overseas. Their role is going to be extorting funds and being a revenue base overseas.
Got it.
If any of the current Wagner mercenaries, if they sign with they're signing as individuals with the Ministry of Defense. In other words, they've just enlisted. They're no longer mercenaries. They are now, call them recruits, call them conscripts. But if you were, Christopher, if you were a local division commander or a corps commander wearing 2 or 3 stars in the Russian army, and
Mhm.
you were told that you're getting, several thousand former Wagner fighters, and you're supposed to integrate them into your forces, where are you going to put them? Where are you going to put them?
Probably in like command positions along the front, because that's what they're like. They're good killing machines, but at the same time, like I'm not sure I want to trust them with command. So if not there, then in the back,
Well, okay.
logistics.
Yeah, you are not going to put them, you're right, you're going to move them as far forward as fast as possible.
Yeah,
You're going to disperse them into other units as quickly as possible,
yeah,
ideally so that you never have more than one former Wagner fighter in any more than a platoon.
yeah,
And 3 platoons in a company, 3 companies or 4 companies in a battalion. You're going to scatter these guys so that you don't want them palling around together. You
no,
don't
no, no,
want
no, no.
them hanging out together and encouraging others with their Wagner mystique. You're going to
Yeah,
want them to feel alone and isolated,
yeah,
and oh yeah, I've got to rely on these guys, and if I talk smack about them or I brag about being in Wagner Group, they're just as likely to beat me up or just kill me. So you're
yeah.
going to scatter them as quickly as possible because you don't want them in coherent units. For those that choose to go to Belarus, okay, well, Belarus is building reception camps. I've seen some reports, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think up to 10,000 Wagner soldiers, so about, half to a third, okay? But if they go into these camps in Belarus, what are they then going to do?
They're
What
gonna pal
job do they
around,
have?
talk to each other.
Okay? You can't have them armed. They
No,
can't. So basically they have become interred. They're almost like prisoners of war. They can't, they're not gonna have any arms. They're not going to have any of their equipment. And so what are they going to do until the war ends?
they're just gonna sit there. And with a population that doesn't like Lukashenko, and having all these former militant people eager to be in command of events, any alliance between the people and the Wagner group, especially in Belarus, must be stopped, or else Lukashenko's done.
So again, do I think it likely that these guys, they may just be simply withdrawn because a whole lot of the Wagner group didn't participate in the march on Moscow. So they sift out, who can we kind of trust? We really don't trust them, but okay, they didn't participate in the mutiny. They claim to be loyal. Okay, you give them the choice. If you're loyal, then you enlist in the Russian army and you go be a Russian soldier. No one's going to trust them, but that's about the only thing that they can do. Or they accept internment in Belarus. How long does that last? Because if you don't feed them and you don't give them something meaningful to do, they're going to hang around in these internment camps and do what? Learn music? They're going to what? Read? Are they going to read Aristotle and Plato and
Maybe,
maybe? But is it? I mean, is it
the city
likely?
needs
Are
guardians.
they going to spend time reading the great books? No. Okay.
No,
I don't mean to be tongue in cheek. The point is, you have to
yeah,
give these guys something to do, because if they're
yeah,
just sitting around in an internment camp, and you either don't feed them enough so that they don't have the strength to have an uprising, but sooner or
mhm.
later there's going to be an uprising.
So
So
you
I
think there's
think
gonna
what's
be
more
another
likely
uprising?
is once they show up in those camps, they're going to be told, "Congratulations, you have just joined the Belarusian foreign foreign legion, and we're going to send you to go fight in Ukraine with our Russian allies. Basically, they're going to end up in penal battalions.
Okay.
That's what that's just speculation on my part, Christopher.
Do you think that Prigozhin is gonna commit suicide? 2 bullets to the back of the head?
I think that's likely.
Hmm.
I think he will spend the rest of his life wherever he is. He can trust no one. He can never, he can never go in a building higher than the second story, because, and then if he does, he has to stay away from every window.
Yeah.
Who does he get to protect him? Okay, because bodyguards and security are only reliable insofar as either A, they have a high degree of personal loyalty and honor,
Or you pay them. Yeah.
or you have to pay them and pay them
Really
a
well.
lot. And the price only goes up. Where
Machiavelli talks about this. Yeah.
where is Prigozhin going to get that money? His principal revenue stream is over. It's done. So if he accepts, he's disappeared. I mean, we haven't seen him since Sunday.
And Putin was visibly angry in a video. I think it was yesterday or the day before. So I don't think Putin's afraid to tout his anger about this now.
Well, the problem is that Putin has both appeared simultaneously weak and indecisive. And that's just something that a Russian autocrat can't be. No strong man can be that. No prince. This is
No
straight.
yeah.
This is straight Machiavelli. This is right out of The Prince. Because he won't, Putin is not loved, and as long as he's feared, well, he can retain power. But if he's not feared and he won't be loved, then another prince will try his luck and figure he's got nothing to lose.
Yeah. Do you think that this rebellion, I mean, obviously the Wagner Group, and for decades, because of their semi-autonomous nature, obviously the Wagner Group was in a special position to engage in a rebellion, to put this whole thing on.
It's words are funny things. Again, I would come back to this map. I wouldn't call this a rebellion. I'd call it a mutiny. Because it wasn't organized. It wasn't, they had no expressed, they had no political agenda or manifesto. They received a popular, I mean, the civilian people in Rostov, they didn't get any resistance. The local populace might well have been perfectly, willing to, hey, Wagner Group's going to end the war. That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
But the fact that within 12 hours it became clear that Prigozhin he had no plan. He hadn't thought it through.
For a Russian oligarch to do this.
And the fact that for about 12 hours, every Russian oligarch in Moscow was flying their family out of Moscow to Istanbul. The panic was real.
That Putin would start to just kill everybody?
Not that Putin would kill everybody, but that they didn't want to hang around and see. They didn't want to be hanging around and seeing who was really going to emerge.
And find out. Yeah.
Okay. Because if you're not in the line of fire, then whoever the next strongman is, you come back, you sit down, you drink tea, you reach an understanding, and business goes on as it always has, or as it as it
Mhm.
was in the past.
Yeah.
Yes, Rebecca.
Question, Dr. Summers. Do
Yes.
you think that what Wagner did and the fact that at least in some shape or form it created some chaos in Moscow, it kind of undermined Putin's figure and how he's seen among other people? Because I know you mentioned that he's feared, but does the fact that this happened, meaning it looks like he's unbeatable, that he actually can't be beaten if like a stronger mutiny actually raises to power, and maybe this gives push to other people to rise against them?
Yes. I think you're exactly right, Rebecca, is that I haven't seen or read any analysis that says Putin
Putin came out strong.
came out stronger or Putin handled this well. Across the spectrum, there are plenty of people who have made the argument that, like him or hate him, as long as he is the Russian autocrat and his authority extends to Russia, so what? He's a thug. He's an autocrat. He's a dictator. He's a murderous, these are all true. I mean, Putin I find it curious that in the past, Putin was not at all shy about, killing hundreds of civilians. And maybe it's just simply because he was a younger man then, a young man in his late 40s is more likely to accept risk and be willing to play for longer odds. But the evidence is out there and very clear that he
But Dr. Summers,
he's not shy about slaughtering hundreds of people to attain his political goals. Why was the Wagner group basically allowed to withdraw? And does it signal that so much of the Russian military is committed in Ukraine that they simply didn't have sufficient force to arrest these guys? That's what it suggests to me, is that Russia is so far so stripped all of its other capabilities in an attempt to win in Ukraine, to conquer Ukraine, or force Ukraine to accept Russian hegemony, accept the partition of Ukraine, that they simply didn't have the means. Why Prigozhin lost his nerve? Because probably it occurred to him, I don't know what to do now. He hadn't planned for anything. But in Putin's case, he was, he almost needs to completely liquidate Wagner Group in order to reestablish that he's still the same old tough guy that isn't to be messed with. If you strike at the king, you must kill him, or you must succeed.
But Dr. Summers, Putin in his address said that he didn't want the bloodshed of his countrymen, and that he was trying to protect the people of Russia from another civil war.
That's true.
Putin
That's what he did
really
say.
cares about life. Yeah,
That's what he did say.
his
Is that
rhetoric was very
consistent?
interesting.
Okay, but is that consistent with how he has behaved in the past?
I think he's more concerned with his own being on top in Russia than with protecting life.
I would say I think you're right. I think the only person that he is really concerned with is Putin. But okay, that doesn't make him an unusual man in that regard. But I think that it is a fair calculation for him to say that if I were to liquidate the Wagner Group, I don't have sufficient force if the Russian people rise up. I cannot suppress the Russian populace in general, because we're so deeply engaged in Ukraine. We just simply don't have the necessary security forces to repress the country.
I guess this lends another question. While it's true that so much of the Russian military is in Ukraine and they're all engaged trying to win that war, why didn't Ukraine push? Why didn't Ukraine push more of their troops while the Russians were engaged in internal fighting?
Okay, how much time did they have to react?
They had like 12 hours, maybe.
Okay,
Total.
the 12 hours is to mount any type of a major operation. And by major operation, I'm talking a division or more. 12 hours is if you had everything ready and standing by and pre-positioned, then okay, you've got a target of opportunity. Bam, the Russian forces are distracted. But all this was happening here. All this was happening in Russia. None of the forces that are manning this front line, none of them, they weren't responding to anything that was happening here.
Yeah.
There was no weakening of the Russian line. And keep in mind, the troops that are here, these are not, some of them I'm sure are very good soldiers, okay? But virtually all of them are conscripts who've received very little training. And regardless of their level of patriotism, it's not the Russian soldiers that are blunting the Ukrainian counteroffensive along this frontier. It is hundreds of yards of minefields and tank ditches and barbed wire and obstacles, and all of that reinforced frontier. Now that the front lines, you've seen the pictures of what the trench lines in World War I look like. That's what Russia has made this line look like. And so in order to penetrate, first of all of those minefields they're under observation. And the Russians have always relied heavily upon artillery. And so in order to breach that minefield or breach those obstacles, it takes tremendous engineering assets, and it also requires mechanized infantry that is going to provide security for the engineers, and air support and counter battery fire. It's a very complex operation to breach a minefield and open up enough of a lane for your armored forces to pour through and exploit the breakthrough.
So do Ukrainians then, I mean, if it truly is so well entrenched over there, do Ukrainians then need to do like an amphibious landing in Crimea or some other like behind the lines assault?
Okay, they could, but amphibious assault, whole different set of complexity, but just as complex.
Yeah.
And Ukraine doesn't have the amphibious lift capability, nor can it be just snuck into the country.
It would be so obvious at ports and so forth.
Yeah, we've got to assume that the Russian intelligence gathering, information gathering capability has not been seriously degraded. So they have eyes. If we look over here, because where would you be possible to mount such a? Okay,
Odessa.
The only place that you could mount it from is this stretch of coastline, and basically Odessa. Now, Odessa is within range of Russian artillery, both rocket and tube. So as soon as they start seeing landing craft, cargo vessels, all of the things that would be needed, and then where do you land? Do you attack Sevastopol? Maybe, but that's the headquarters of the Russian fleet, Black Seas fleet. It's pretty well defended. Okay. Do you attack somewhere along the coast here? You got to have room for beaches. You've got to have room to immediately bring in all of the logistics that are necessary to sustain a major assault. Do you try to sneak past under the Kerch Bridge and attack somewhere in here? Perhaps. There has been some indication that that there has been some insurgent special forces operation happening in this region. I personally think that's what's going to happen, is that the conventional counteroffensive is going to have limited success, that this line is going to become essentially a reinforced frontier, as the kind that we see between North Korea and South Korea. And then the question will be, how successful are the Ukrainian special forces in fomenting insurgency in this region between Crimea?
Can there be a long-standing insurgency in those areas?
Sure. Or I should say, I believe that there can be. I'm not saying that it'll be successful, but I do believe that the Ukrainians will ultimately, if the Ukrainians can successfully retake Crimea and the Donets, it will be a long-term, probably, I've been saying 8 to 10 years.
Wow, for the rest of the war.
Yes. I think that probably within a year, the NATO allies will simply tell Ukraine it's time to accept the reality, make peace, stop fighting, get along with your Russian neighbors, drink vodka, and because we're not going to support any more of this. Russia will claim victory and will formally annex all of this.
Wow.
And make it Russia. And this will remain an armed frontier, barbed wire, tank ditches, minefields, all of it.
So it's act now or never for Zelensky.
Well, I think Zelensky, I think Zelensky will be in fact able to, if he continues to draw the kind of economic and military support, particularly from Poland and the Baltic states that he's been getting, as long as this frontier here, okay, this is Poland.
Yeah.
As long as this frontier remains open between Poland and Ukraine, there will be no shortage of material that arrives that Ukraine is going to have access to, and they will be able to put special forces, small Alpha and Bravo teams into. Rebecca.
Dr. Chalmers, I have a question. So as you were mentioning, that if that side near Russia, that will be technically annexed to become Russian territory, but do you think it will be recognized? Because I know that, as you also taught in the past, in order to recognize it, there's different criteria. Do you think that other countries would actually recognize that as part of Russia now? Or I guess Ukraine signs it as now considered Russian territory?
It will. Okay. Excellent question. Some states will, some states won't. I expect that China
Well,
will immediately recognize Russian sovereignty over this territory.
okay.
And probably Turkey down the road, but after a long.
Turkey might. The countries that are likely to recognize it are the ones that have intention of extending their sovereignty by force. And they will look at this as being, hey, we weren't the first ones to do it. Russia did it. Russia got recognized, when more than, if they can get more than a third of the member states in the United Nations to recognize their extended sovereignty, and then a large part of the world will simply say, yeah, sucks to be Ukraine, glad it's not us. There was a strong indication that large portions of Germany, particularly what had been formerly East Germany, had been fully prepared to accept, Russian claims of sovereignty when the war started, because they looked at it and said, why do we want to get into another war? Why do we get involved in another war, particularly one that deals with Russia and Ukraine? Let's just do business. We leave them alone, they leave us alone. I think China will want to have the situation in Ukraine resolved before they move against Taiwan.
And do you see a move against Taiwan as inevitable for China?
Yeah.
How soon?
I think they're going to make a diplomatic, what I would call a diplomatic move in the spring of 2024. Now, when I say diplomatic, they're going to do a military show of strength and then do an exerted diplomatic push to get the U.S. to essentially acquiesce to an extension of Chinese authority over Taiwan on the Hong Kong model. They will point and say, look at how successful, Hong Kong was integrated into full the full authority and control of Beijing, and there was no violence. There was everyone in Hong Kong is happy, and that's the right relationship for Taiwan. Oh, by the way, look at all of our warships, look at all of our air forces, look at all our all of these exercises that we're doing. But in the spring of 24, I think that's going to be, they will certainly try that first. Then they're going to wait and see what happens in the US election.
Okay.
And then regardless of who gets elected, I think that between probably the spring of 2025, they will then, if the peaceful show of force diplomatic campaign doesn't work effectively by in 2024, then in probably the spring of 2025, regardless of who the U.S. president is.
Yeah.
And then I may be off by 2 years, but if China doesn't move by 2027, they will have the military window will have kind of closed for them.
What does that mean? Aren't they modernizing their military very quickly?
They are, but there are a lot of complicating factors demographically. The shift right now, they have a lot of young men of military age that really don't otherwise have. There's not enough Chinese young women who want to marry these guys, because there is about a 1 to 1.3, about a 30% difference in marriageable population among young, among Chinese young adults of marriageable age. Those are not good odds, and that means you end up with an awful lot of bachelors who really have no stake in the future. Okay.
Wow.
So as China has modernized, and as the Chinese culture has shifted partially, young Chinese women look at it and go, why do I want to marry some, rice farmer in the provinces? I want to have a career. I want to, I want to live in Shanghai. I want to live in Beijing. I want the urban lifestyle. But more importantly, why should I want to hire some dirt poor rice farmer who's never going to leave his home village and have to put up with his mother-in-law and everything that goes along with Han Chinese culture, that with regards to husband, wife, and extended family relationships. Young women, and because of China's one-child policy, which has been ended, but they've just ended it in the last couple of years, is they just simply don't have the demographic shift that's coming. They haven't figured out how to reverse. So right now, China is peaking right about now in terms of its available military manpower.
I guess manpower
by 2027, they're going to have turned that corner, and by 2030, the window will have closed.
Wow. Okay. So
that's
the
what the
US
demographics tell us.
Yeah. So the U.S. is basically banking on giving Taiwan full support long enough that China doesn't make a move, and just waiting till that window closes, basically.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Christopher, I can't tell you what U.S. policy is, because I don't think the U.S. has a coherent. The U.S. does not currently have a coherent China-Taiwan policy. We just don't.
Strategic ambiguity.
No, strategic
Is it
ambiguity.
not-
Strategic ambiguity would suggest that we have a policy. We don't.
Okay.
Because we're not maintaining strategic ambiguity. When the Secretary of State meets with the Chinese premier and tells him and announces that that the U.S. sees Taiwan as an integral part of China, and doesn't then say the strategic ambiguity, but that no, we see, we have relationships with Beijing, and then the same time, literally within hours, the president at a political fundraiser refers to the dictator in Beijing and openly says that Xi doesn't know what's happening in his own with his own regime, that he didn't know anything about that. The entire spy balloon happened, and Xi Jinping was kept in the dark about it, that he didn't know what was going on. So that's two insults for the price of one. You've got the Secretary of State saying one thing, and you have the president saying two things in a single public statement, both of which are insulting to what? The individual honor and the face of this supposed strategic counterpart.
Yeah.
That's not policy, Christopher.
No,
that's what I mean.
That's a rhetorical problem.
That is a president who I believe has been so compromised by his family's business relationships in China that the Chinese are just waiting for the opportunity to make use of them, to exert that pressure, which I believe that they have. Now, I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but I see no evidence of a coherent national strategic vision with regards to the US and China.
Yeah.
And so therefore why do I say this? Because there's no evidence of a coherent national military strategy
Mhm.
that addresses China. And
Geez.
that's not a new problem. That problem goes back all the way,
Nixon,
quite frankly, now to 2011.
2011. What happened?
Maybe 2009, but 2011 for sure.
What
So
happened that year?
this goes back multiple. This we cannot lay this at the feet of President Biden. This goes back decades.
Okay, what happened in 2011 that you say that's specifically the?
Well, I just know
turning
that
point?
2011, when I read the National Military Strategy document that was produced going into President Obama's reelection year, it was incoherent. It just simply did not logically address that what the rising threat that China could become. It made assumptions predicated upon China was going to continue to was going to liberalize, was going to become more Western.
That's
That
what they said?
Yep, that was the assumptions that they were making, is that increased economic trade and interdependence between the US and China would ensure that China was going to become more like us, and we would continue to be the sort of the senior partner in this growing relationship of economic interdependence, and that we really had nothing to fear from that traditional Chinese diplomacy did not look outward, which
I
was
think
partially correct.
Yes.
But so
Speaking
that
of-
was
my bad. I was just gonna say, speaking on a very macro level, I think we learned from history that the market for goods really has the lower hand than the producer. The producer can really set terms for who buys, and so the U.S. saying that we're a senior partner because we control the markets that China sells to. I mean, I'm not sure that really holds.
I think you're correct. Rebecca will be in an interesting with her position with the IMF. Of course, she is on the investment and financing end of this equation. Because the IMF exists to provide funding into countries, states, regions of the world that are not attractive investment opportunities for conventional venture capital. But therein is, did I get that right?
Yeah.
I'm a little familiar with these things. And but that very question, and it will be interesting to me over time, Rebecca, to see that from your experience, what are the metrics of success that you're using and applying, that the IMF at the micro level, at the granular level, what are the measures or metrics of success that are established going into the development package, and taking the source of the funding and the control measures and where it ends up being invested? It's beyond the scope of our discussion, for this session, but I'm keen to learn these things, because from my perspective, coming from the DoD side of the house, and knuckle dragger that I am, it's always, I've wondered, okay, how are you measuring success? Now, that goes way beyond our scope here. I look at the clock and see that it's 8:27. Sam, was there any question that you wanted to ask before we wrap this up?
Yeah, but I probably could just email you later on. It's going to be a long one.
Well, let me at least give me a hint so that I will know to look for it.
Well, basically, is what you guys were talking about, like Chris mentioned about the civil war with Russia going against each other and with the war in Ukraine. Do you think with Russia's civilians now seeing with Putin's power and him being falling in collapse, would Russia end up becoming more independent in the future?
My guess, the short answer, very good question. It's also a very long answer. The short answer is I don't think so, because the Russian national character is such that the Russian people as a people have endured so much for so long. Suffering is part of the Russian character. You know, you've read Dostoevsky, you've read Chekhov, you're familiar with the scope of Russian history in the 19th and 20th century, now in the 21st. They have, the Russian people have just they have, as a people, they have endured so much suffering that I don't think conditions are bad enough yet that they're going to rise up. I think that they're prepared to endure a great deal. I don't think they really care who rules in Moscow, as long as they, you've heard the expression, is there a blessing for the Tsar? And the rabbi answers, a blessing for the Tsar? Certainly. God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us. I think that really reflects how the Russian people feel, that as long as they can live their daily lives, and what happens in Moscow or what happens across the frontier, are they patriotic? Yes. Do they love their country? Of course. But I don't think conditions are bad enough in Russia that they're going to rise up just to pursue some ideal of liberty. Yes, Rebecca.
Just an open close parentheses, because we were talking about China before. I actually started reading, as I was saying in my class, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, I hope, Mearsheimer. He has a lot of opinions on China and its relationship to the US. So definitely, if you're interested in it, you should read it. I think he has
Yes.
a lot of...
I don't recall at the tip of my tongue, but yeah, I immediately recognize the name.
He's a realist in the School of International Relations. So I definitely give it a look. So
I was going to say, Rebecca, how among your colleagues, would you say that what's the split between your realists, your rationalists, and your revolutionist or idealist?
So let's just say that since it's online, I work only with military people. So everything in the military. I had some strong opinion, I guess other people, and let's just say that I got an email back from one of the students who was trying to explain himself to me. We can talk about this some other time.
Yeah.
But let's just say that a lot of people actually have really strong realist opinions, I have to say. And other people, I have to say it's pretty split for the first class that I had.
Really?
So it's definitely really interesting seeing different perspectives and just kind of how it applies on the bigger spectrum. And then you're also radicals. So it's a good mix.
Yep. Well, I will be keen to hear more. We're right at we're at 8:32. This was set to go for an hour and a half. I think we're probably at a good stopping point. Is there interest in perhaps doing this again the last week of July, sometime around then?
Yeah.
As long as it's after 6 o'clock.
Absolutely.
I'd be
Okay,
very
yeah.
interested, yeah.
Well, I will share this with Rolando and let him take a look at it, see if this is something that he'd like to package or move forward as a Conversatio podcast. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I will be curious to see how this all looks. And thank you very much, Christopher, for putting this together. Thank you for getting the word out.
Thank you for
I'd have
reaching
to
out,
say
Dr.
that
Summers.
this is, I didn't know who was going to show up and participate. As always, you know, the Informal Policy Working Group is a fluid and flexible kind of thing.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for participating.
I just have to say, Sam and Rebecca, I just called Dr. Summers one day, and so Dr. Summers was very receptive to setting this up, and so thank you so much for giving that presentation and for answering all of our questions, and for doing this all over the summer too. And it's been so cool to apply what we've learned through the semesters to what's going on right now, and to keep the learning going over the summer. So thank you, Dr. Summers.
It's my pleasure. It's nice to take a break from the other reading and studying I've been doing. This is a lot of fun for me. So thank you very much. I lift a glass to all of you, and have a good rest of your evening, and I will be talking with you soon.